Okay, I know that I said I would do a happy ending, which I did. But I couldn't help but add a little angst in. But it's nothing as extreme as the last video. I had trouble writing this video, because I had no motivation or inspiration. But I just want to remind you guys that this is an alternate ending, so you could pretend that the sad part 2 never happened. The first part did happen, but the sad part 2 never existed in this alternate ending. You guys could skip this part, but this is my wit account if you would rather read the stories instead of watching them. Anyways, please enjoy the last part to the TsukiYama Hanahaki disease. Tsukishima stared into the distance. His brown eyes couldn't seem to grasp the reality of the situation. He felt as if nothing was real. He couldn't believe that what happened was real. He wanted to wake up and see how this was all a dream. That he'll be walking to school with Yamaguchi, arguing with the king, yelling at the shrimp, and pretending to hate volleyball. But no matter how many times he pinched his skin, he wouldn't wake up. This was real. Yamaguchi wouldn't walk with him, he wouldn't argue with the king, he couldn't yell at the shrimp, and he couldn't keep pretending to hate volleyball. His eyes welled up with tears, but he wouldn't let them fall. He didn't want to cry anymore, he didn't want to face the aftermath, the endless feeling of self-pity. That was something he was never prepared for. It didn't matter how many times he would beg himself not to cry, the tears always found a way to fall. The tears slid down his red cheeks, creating a wet trail. His nose wrinkled up, his hands rubbed harshly onto his wet eyes, his long limbs curled up, making himself seem like a small lump under the blankets. He missed Yamaguchi. He took Yamaguchi for granted, and now he was gone. As he got swallowed into his self-pity, he heard the noise of the hospital room door opening. His hands shook as he waited for the unwelcome visitor to leave. He couldn't handle any more of the pitying looks, how the nurses would give him sad glances. He knew that they wanted to ask him, "Are you okay?" but thankfully they never did. A frail hand shook him. "Okay, you're being released." Tsukishima groaned and curled away from the hand that shook him. "Okay, you're leaving." Tsukishima didn't want to leave. He would never be able to be the old Tsukishima he once was. He knew this. He was a broken shell of his old self. That's why he didn't want to leave. The hospital was comforting, people didn't expect much from him. They thought of him as a baby crow. Defenseless and weak. But he was fine with that. He didn't want to hold the expectations of everyone. Even the thought of returning to school, the thought of returning home had him shaking. He didn't want to sleep in the same bedroom as before, the bedroom where he sneaked a young Yamaguchi in every Friday, a bedroom where he and Yamaguchi would play pretend. The room where Yamaguchi's lingering scent would forever be stuck in Tsukishima's room. The scent would be entrapped onto the bedsheets, trapped onto the pillow covers, and the smell would be trapped in Tsukishima's mind. The haunting scent would forever stay gnawing at Tsukishima's brain, not letting him forget the scent that held so many memories. Yamaguchi Tadashi. He didn't want anything that reminded him of Yamaguchi. He didn't want to face the hard reality that he and Yamaguchi would never be the same. He would never hear the Gomen Tsuki that forever played in his mind. He would never see the eyes of admiration that Yamaguchi always held towards him. He was thrown out of his thoughts to his mother's nagging voice. He sighed and got up from the hospital bed. "I guess I have to go," he thought before getting ready to leave the hospital. Tsukishima has been home for a week. And in that week, Tsukishima occupied himself so his mind wouldn't drift to any unwanted thoughts. He slept during the day, stood up at late hours binge-watching anime, and eating whatever junk food he could get his hands on. When the sun started to rise, he would go to sleep just to wake up at 6 p.m. and let the cycle continue. It was a sad yet peaceful cycle that Tsukishima couldn't escape from. And with him returning to school in a week, the continuous nightmares had him staying up practically all day with little to no sleep. He knew that his parents were worried for him, he knew that his brother wanted to ask him if he was okay but he couldn't find the courage to talk to them. Ever since returning home, all he felt was fright and paranoia. Even when he desperately tried not to, his mind would always drift to the thoughts that haunted him enough. The thoughts of almost dying, the thoughts of thinking he would never see the world again, the thoughts of Yamaguchi in Hiroshima, and how he wished the thoughts would just stop. That they wouldn't keep replaying in his mind. But they kept replaying. So here he was, lying in bed with rappers surrounding his bed. The need to socialize was overwhelming but he ignored the need for human interactions. He sighed and laid his head back letting his tiredness take over. Monday, the 1st of February. TsukiYama stared up at the blank ceiling. He was returning to school today and to say he was excited would be a lie. The dark circles under his eyes showed exactly how excited he was. He couldn't sleep, his mind kept drifting to all the things that could go wrong. All these what-ifs clouded his brain making it almost impossible to get even a wink of sleep. The sound of his mother in the kitchen beginning breakfast has his stomach rumbling. He wanted to go downstairs but after barely uttering a word to his family for a week, the idea of being confronted by his mother didn't feel appealing. But the overwhelming feeling of hunger had him going downstairs. He watched as his mother began to cook breakfast. Just as he was about to walk back upstairs, thinking that this wasn't a good idea, he heard his mother's voice. "Come help me with breakfast, Kay." TsukiYama glanced at the stairs and back at the kitchen. TsukiYama's mother cleared her throat and tapped her foot onto the floor. "I'm waiting." He walked into the kitchen and took the bowl of pancake batter from his mother. He began stirring, the silence was awkward yet comforting, to say the least. "Are you ready for school?" "I guess." TsukiYama's mum glanced at her son, clearly expecting a more detailed response from him. "Did you miss volleyball?" TsukiYama grimaced at the mention of volleyball. "I mean, I wouldn't say I missed it. More like I'm used to practicing every day for hours. Not to mention how the shrimp and the king are freaky good at volleyball. And our upperclassmen are." TsukiYama's mum glanced at her son. She noticed how he started to ramble on. The mere mention of his old teammates had him talking for what seemed like hours. TsukiYama noticed how his mother was staring intently at him. His cheeks flared pink in embarrassment and he stopped rambling on about volleyball and his old teammates. "Sorry for rambling," TsukiYama muttered out. "No, I'm happy you're finally talking more." Silence once again filled the kitchen. "I understand that after everything you may not have been ready to return to school. But the doctor said that returning could help you." TsukiYama absently nodded. She sighed. TsukiYama once again was returning to his new self. Quiet and unfocused to anything around him. "I transferred you out of every class that Yama." She stopped herself when piercing brown eyes met her blue eyes. "Why Yamaguchi?" TsukiYama sucked in a breath. Did he visit me at all while I was in the hospital?" TsukiYama's mum turned her head away from her son's hopeful face. She didn't want her son anywhere near Yamaguchi. She firmly believed that Yamaguchi was at fault for Kei being at the hospital and almost dying. He didn't visit you at the hospital." TsukiYama's face sank at the sudden news. "Oh. Okay." He set the bowl down. "Excuse me. I should get ready for school." Before his mother could respond, he ran off to his room. Time went by fast. It was already time for school. He walked downstairs. His mum called out for him but with a quiet "I'll see you later" he walked out the door. The walk to school was quiet. An almost taunting silence. As he walked to school, all he could see was Yamaguchi. The green-haired male's silhouette walked beside TsukiYama. But whenever TsukiYama would reach to grab the hand that belonged to Yamaguchi, the faint silhouette disappeared. He lowered his head, trying to ignore anything and everything that reminded him of Yamaguchi. He looked up to see the school in the distance. He started to quicken his pace, hoping to get to school before the first period started. TsukiYama could feel eyes staring at him. He could hear the loud whispers. He could practically feel the hands being pointed towards his body. His hands shook as he tried to get a better grip on his books. Eyes from every direction watched his every move. They watched as he walked to his locker, they watched when he was getting his supplies. It didn't help how he heard everyone's conversation. It was as if they weren't even trying to stay quiet. Did you know he had Hanahaki? It's some rare sickness you get if someone doesn't love you back. How sad. I heard that he almost died. Yeah, apparently his brother found him collapsed in his bedroom. He couldn't take it anymore. The memories he so desperately tried to forget were now coming back. The memories flashed throughout his brain. All the emotions he tried to keep locked away were now being forced back out. A choked sob left his mouth. The hallway got quiet at the sudden sound that left the blonde. Is he crying? Wait, he's really crying? Why is he crying? With his hands having a deadly grip on his school books, his eyes glanced in every direction looking for an exit. His head was spinning, all he heard was everyone talking in a rush manner. With an exit spotted, he rushed towards it. Pushing people out of the way, he walked faster. He knew he should have just stood in the hospital. TsukiYama kept running and running until he couldn't anymore. He stopped running when his long limbs refused to move anymore, when his legs shook like branches in the wind. The rain crashed onto the floor. The sky was a dark gray, making it hard to see anything other than the clouds that coated the sky. The harsh rain fell onto the blonde's head, making his blonde hair dampen up. Now, after examining his surroundings, TsukiYama noticed where he was. The park where he met Yamaguchi. The park where a young TsukiYama saved a young Yamaguchi from his bullies. Where the surprising friendship first began to blossom between the two. He didn't know why he was here. Maybe he was hoping that fate would bring Yamaguchi here. Here he was, sitting on an abandoned swing set of a park where he first met Yamaguchi. The old park was now abandoned, with the old shiny playset now rusted and worn down. His long limbs could barely sit comfortably on the swing, seeing how it was for kids. But never mind the minor details. His breath was harsh and shallow, still trying to catch his breath after running. He heard footsteps come closer to him, but he didn't give the newcomer a glance. That was until he heard the familiar Tsuki that he willed himself to forget about. Yamaguchi Tadashi. The one who first introduced the Tsuki nickname. The owner of it. He turned his head slowly. There he was. But this time it wasn't a hallucination, it wasn't his mind playing tricks on him. The real Yamaguchi was here. TsukiYama felt so many emotions. He couldn't pinpoint all of them. But a distinct one he could point out was conflicted. He was conflicted because one side of him was happy to see the man who haunted his mind 24/7, but the other side of him still held some resentment towards the freckled male. Yamaguchi. The name slipped out. It sounded peaceful. As if he wasn't having an internal breakdown at the moment. Tsuki. Silence surrounded the pair. Neither of them had the guts to touch on another. Even though they both craved the touches. Being deprived of each other's caresses. Yamaguchi was the first to move. His legs pulled him towards TsukiYama. TsukiYama saw him coming but couldn't find it in himself to move away. He watched as the freckled hand reached towards his cheek. The hand caressed his pinkened cheek. TsukiYama wouldn't admit it, but he couldn't help it when his head leaned closer towards the freckled hand that gently touched his cheek. The way Yamaguchi touched TsukiYama was as if he was afraid he would break with one wrong touch. "You're really here?" he mumbled out quietly. Tsukishima wanted to cry but he didn't want to appear weak in front of Yamaguchi. Oh, how he wanted to just start sobbing. After thinking he would never get to see Yamaguchi again, and now he was right in front of him. Yamaguchi held the blonde close. It's okay. Let it all out. Tsukishima let out a loud sob. His hands shook as his breaths came out unsteady. The two slid onto the cold wet floor. Neither of them cared at the moment. Tsukishima gripped the hoodie that Yamaguchi was wearing. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the blonde had calmed down. Tsukishima slowly pulled away from Yamaguchi. Yamaguchi stared at the blonde. Even though Tsukishima had just stopped crying, Yamaguchi still found him beautiful. Tsukishima felt Yamaguchi staring at him. In a low, weak voice he mumbled out, "Stop staring." Yamaguchi smiled. "I can't. You're just too beautiful." Tsukishima turned even more pink. If that was even possible. Yamaguchi smiled. Slowly his smile turned into a frown. I'm sorry." "What?" "It wasn't your fault. With what happened to me." Yamaguchi stared in confusion, wanting to speak but also wanting to let Tsukishima continue. "It wasn't your fault that you didn't like me. You liked Hiroshima. I understand that now. You shouldn't have to force yourself to be with me because you feel guilty or because you didn't want me to die. After everything that happened, I realized that even though it hurts, I would much rather have you as a friend than to lose you forever." "Stop." Yamaguchi had tears rolling down. He held the blonde close. "I love you." Tsukishima's mouth opened and closed, not finding the right words to say. Yamaguchi wasn't disappointed with Tsukishima's silence, he just continued to talk. "I'm sorry it took me so long to realize. After what happened I thought I was going to lose you forever." He faced the blonde, both their eyes glistened with tears. I love you too," he said with a smile on his face, a sincere one. Yamaguchi smiled, staring at Tsukishima. Both of them had a million things they wanted to say, but for now that was meaningless. The only thing that mattered was their long-awaited ending to their love story. Okay, I can't believe I hit 1000 plus subscribers. I want to say thank you to you all for actually supporting this channel. Before this video ends, I want to say that I'll be uploading a 1K special. The video will most likely be a rare ship. If you have a rare ship you want me to do, just comment it. Whichever is the most commented or liked, I'll do it. But if you really want that ship to be done, then I'll try to do it in a future video. Also keep requesting ships for me to do. It keeps me from struggling to pick a ship to do next. I hope you all enjoyed this video.